Hello, this is Dave Hurwitz, Executive Editor at ClassicsToday.com, and here I am in the Overflow room, which I finally got to in these days of the coronavirus pandemic. I've been trapped in my apartment in Brooklyn, which, as some of you may have noticed, has quite a few CDs in it already, but here are where I put the things I didn't have room for in Brooklyn. Actually, this is one of the rooms. There's another, and we don't have to go into that. As you can see, I will tip this around. It goes from there to there. And all of these shelves, by the way, are double disc thick. So they're double rows. And I could turn this around a little bit and show you also that there's more on this side. It's nuts. It's absolutely nuts. And I know it, and you know it. And all I can say is, have I listened to everything in here? Yes, that I can say, absolutely 100%. Would I ever listen to it again? It's impossible. It would take more than a human lifetime. The reason I keep this stuff, and really the only reason, because I'm not sentimental about things, is that I have it as a reference for professional purposes, so I can check facts once in a while, because as many of you have pointed out, my memory can be fallible when it comes to names, dates, places, number of recordings, and also so that I have the resources to be able to make these videos and do something useful. I would not be sitting with this stuff unless I had the opportunity to use it in a productive way, to talk to you, to talk about recordings, and to be able to give discographies that are at least representative. And I know from talking to you in the commentary sections that many of you have discographies for individual works that are even more extensive than mine. So I'm not the only crazy person out there. I thought I would just take this opportunity, since it's a nice, relaxing Saturday, actually, to answer a couple questions about how I got started in this business, because I'm asked all the time and I've never really told the story. But I'll try and give it to you. Because I think it's kind of interesting, and I've been approached by many people who want to know how to get into the business of being a music critic or a record critic, and it's not easy. I was kind of a self-made guy, and I think most critics are. It's never where you start; it's where you wind up your career. And this is still not mine. For those of you who don't know, I got a lot of promotional material as a critic over the years, and I've saved a lot of it and got rid of even more. But basically, and I purchased a lot of it too, because I can't make a living as a music critic. I don't try to. I work for a real estate finance company, and I have for the past 30 years. My background is in business and banking. So I can't tell you, quite honestly, that I was always destined to be a music critic, although I always wanted to do something in music and the arts, because that's what my training was. So let me start at the beginning and tell you basically how this all happened, if you're interested. And if you're not, you can switch me off now. What got me interested in criticism, specifically criticism, was a revelation I had. One of my aunts gave me a recording of Beethoven's Fifth. It was the Klemperer recording of Beethoven's Fifth. But we had another performance of Beethoven's Fifth sitting around on our record shelves. It was, I believe, Eugene Ormandy's. And when I played the two, they didn't sound anything alike. And it made me nuts. Absolutely crazy. I couldn't figure out what was going on. What did Beethoven actually write as opposed to what were the performers doing? And so I went and I took a look at the score, which I didn't really know how to read very well. I played a little piano, a little clarinet, but score reading was something I had to teach myself. And what I saw was that neither of them were doing exactly what was written there. Both of them did some. And I was very, very curious to see which performances realized most of what I saw in front of me. And from that came my desire to collect multiple versions of things. And the rest, as they say, is more or less history. Educationally, I have 2 master's degrees, one from Johns Hopkins University, the other from Stanford University. They're both in modern European cultural history. I did one master's degree in Der Fall Hindemith, the Hindemith-Furtwängler affair. So for those of you who say I don't like or don't know my Furtwängler, I beg to differ. I've written a paper on him. And then I did a second thesis on Orientalism in French music in the 19th century, which was, I thought, a really interesting topic. It was about how the perception of Western culture as it influenced, Asian culture changed from the typical nationalist, noble white guy to Western culture as the bearer of corruption and decadence, as best represented by Ravel's Chanson Mal de Casse. And that was my second one at Stanford. I did not go on to get a doctorate. I had thought about it, but the fact of the matter was that at that point, which was the early 1980s, in American universities, there were no jobs whatsoever in the liberal arts, and particularly in the history profession. I would have loved to do it. I was a teaching associate at Stanford. I had a great time, but I wanted to make a living. So I switched over to the business school, and that's how I got into finance and banking, and also marketing and some other things that I did. So there was nothing that prepared me to be a critic. What I did do was collect records ever since I was a young guy, and not just classical music. I mean, my first recordings were Peter, Paul, and Mary, and the Weavers, and Harry Belafonte, Calypso, still one of my favorite records in the world. Terrific stuff. And so my tastes were kind of eclectic. And when I finally came back to New York and started working in banking, actually, I hung out, like so many of you did, at record stores. And one of them was Orpheus Remarkable Recordings on Lexington Avenue, which was a terrific, terrific place. It was run by two lovely gentlemen who were in the record business, and I got a lot of insider dirt on what happened at Decca and what was happening at Columbia, which became Sony. And while I was there, I ran into a gentleman who was the editor of High Fidelity magazine. And we got to talking, and it turned out we had similar backgrounds. I had gone to high school in New Haven, Connecticut at Hopkins Grammar, which was now just called Hopkins School, but then it was called Hopkins Grammar at Day Prospect Hill because it was a merger of the boys' school with two girls' prep schools. And the editor of High Fidelity at that time had gone to Yale, and we had both been involved in a performance of Bernstein's Mass under Bernstein. I wasn't directly involved with it, but he was, and so we had sort of participated, and it was very interesting, to chew the fat. And I told him, I said, I read High Fidelity. I'd really love to write a review. So he said, write one, see what happens. So I did, and he liked them, and he published them. And one of the very first reviews that I wrote was of Tchaikovsky's Sixth Symphony, the Bernstein one, the second one, the one on Deutsche Grammophon with the 18-minute long finale. And I remember it really vividly because people were hemming and hawing about how it was just, the acme of emotional excess. And I didn't hear it that way. I thought that it sounded more like Bernstein was trying to make a point. He was trying to find a way to balance the symphony's superstructure, because it has this huge long first movement, you'll recall, and then this rather brief, miserable finale. And by stretching out the finale and choosing moderate tempos throughout, he achieved a certain structural balance that I thought was very impressive. And I didn't think it was excessively emotional in a what you might call sort of wanton or provocative way. I think he was really trying to express what the music could do in a different way. And I liked that. And one of the things I said about Bernstein was that, as often as not, he tries to be a teacher. His excesses are not the result of, inability to control his emotions, but rather his desire to make points, to tell us something about what the music is doing. And that's sort of what I wrote, in so many words. Well, he read the review, because High Fidelity was still a big deal, reputable organ in those days. And he had his secretary, who I believe was still Helen Coates, write to the editor saying that of all the reviews that they had read, mine was one that actually best tried to describe what he was doing in that interpretation. Well, I felt wonderful, And from that point, I sort of have credited Leonard Bernstein for suggesting I was on the right path. And you can blame him, too, if you hate the path that I've been on subsequently. But that was how I got into the critical business, writing for High Fidelity. And after that, of course, I started writing for many other music review magazines since this was about 1984, 85, and maybe 86 was when the first reviews I wrote were published. And after that, I just didn't look back. I kept working my day job because you couldn't make a living with what a magazine was paying you. And I persisted in writing. I always preferred to review recordings rather than concerts, although I do concert reviews on occasion. The reason is because nobody cares about what you have to say about a concert. I mean, it's over. It's not going to be repeated. Everyone can have a bad day. The audience invariably applauds like crazy and gives the thing a standing ovation, almost invariably, right? And who am I to say that they're wrong, that they didn't have a good time, that they didn't enjoy themselves? I just wanted to be able to review something that you could actually hear, so that I could say something about a performance or about a recording, and you could hear it for yourself and verify whether I was right or wrong, whether I agreed or disagreed. I mean, that was why I enjoyed doing recordings. Recordings are a consumer product, right? They're cheap entertainment, basically. And you're going to spend your money on that. You could spend your money on a lot of other things. So if you're going to buy this one, why should you have this one instead of that one? That was why I found reviewing recordings a very, very rewarding part of my critical career. But as you can see, stuff accumulates. It accumulates really to the point of absurdity. One of the things that always sort of annoyed me, and I found questionable about what I heard from Gramophone in the days, because I was friendly with several critics at Gramophone as my career grew, was that the magazine sent you the discs and wouldn't let you keep them. And that to me was crazy, because how can a critic have a knowledge of a discography if he doesn't have a chance to actually accumulate and keep the discs that he's actually reviewed? And beyond that, listen to them more than once. I mean, I listen to recordings. I have to write a review. There's a pressure of time, or I want to say something about it. I feel strongly one way or another. And you can come back 10 years later and feel completely different about it. Why? Because you've changed. Your sound system may have changed. The competition may have changed. There may have been a dozen other recordings of the same piece that either proved a revelation or proved that what you said was the acme of excellence was no longer the acme of excellence. There are a million reasons that are legitimate why people can change their mind. So my goal as a critic has always been to talk about facts. That is, you can agree or disagree with whatever I say about a recording. I don't really care. My opinion is my opinion, yours is yours. They're equally valid, right? But for me, if I say so-and-so is faster than other guy, that has to be true. Or there's, bad intonation in bar 56, or something has gone wrong in the scherzo, or Giulini doesn't contrast the tempi in the second movement of Mahler's Ninth the way Mahler wanted, that has to be true. You may not like it, you may like it. You may disagree with the conclusion I draw from that, but the facts have to be correct. By taking this approach, what I hoped was that those who agree with me would find me a reliable guide, and those who disagreed with me would find me a reliable guide for the very same reason. And one of the things I've always told the people I work with, the writers who have written for ClassicsToday.com since I founded that in 1999, was don't write autobiography. Nobody really cares whether you like or dislike something. What matters is that you describe the performance correctly enough so that readers, or viewers in this case, can draw their own conclusions. And I'm really very, very excited about doing this YouTube channel because it's a very, very different medium from what I'm used to, which is writing. In writing, first of all, you can be far more detailed. Second of all, your choice of words is much stronger and more powerful. I could say horrible things about people with a smile on my face and laugh, and it's happened. And people have written to me and say, oh, he's not such a bad guy after all. He's such an asshole when he writes, because you don't get the intonation, you don't get the expression, you don't get the visual element. And that makes a big difference, doesn't it, in how a review is going to come across and whether something which could be damning or praiseworthy is pure or a mixed message. So I'm fascinated to do this. I do find the video medium a little bit limiting to the extent that you can say much more in a more concise way when you're writing than you can when you're speaking. Because if I want to talk about the details of a performance, the actual performance details, I can say at figure 7, measure 23, this happens, and write it and let it go. But when you're talking, you can't really do that. You have to hear something. That's why I'm trying so hard to include sound samples in my review, so I can say this is what it sounds like and see that you agree. But the point is, now I have this stuff. It's all accumulated over the past 35, 40 years, really longer, 45 years, since I was in my teens, and I'm 58 now. So I really hope that over the next, months, years, who knows, that these video chats will really become a different kind of medium for exploring the world of music, first of all, and the world of recordings, because as you all know, the world of recordings is much larger than the world of music is now, because there is much more stuff out there on recordings than you are ever going to have the opportunity to hear in real life, especially, unusual repertoire, local repertoire, things that people don't do, and the classical repertoire itself, which is changing all the time. But recordings are permanent documents of what's going on in the world of music and what happened in the world of music. And so the entire concept of what classical music is has become completely different because of recordings. Classical music used to mean the small canon of frequently performed works that everybody agreed was the great stuff, right? But now, classical, it's anything that's not pop or rock or is old, right? I mean, technically, a symphony by Cannabich or one of those guys, it's not classical. It happens to be a Mannheim symphony. It's a classical period symphony. It's not a piece of classical music. There hasn't been any vetting process. There hasn't been any consensus that's arisen that says this is the great stuff. It's just old, and there are people who need to make a living, so they record it, they shove it out there, we listen to it. So we have to be, I think, a lot more judgmental about the quality of the music that we're hearing, about the kind of music that we listen to, and what we say about it. What we say is whether it's good or bad or great or not great, and what category it belongs to. That was part of what I was getting at in my chat about Lieder, which caused a certain level of consternation among some of the Lieder aficionados. The point of the matter is that we have to think about music, I believe, in terms of formal categories that allow us to make useful comparisons, like to like, not, apples to oranges, which is what happens when you compare a song to a symphony. Compare songs to other songs, compare symphonies to other symphonies. There are wonderful, wonderful opportunities out there to experience a wider universe of music than ever before at lower and lower cost than ever before. And now, of course, with YouTube and digital media, there's even more. It's even bigger. And from a business point of view, it's a catastrophe. It's cheaper. I know you guys all love to get whatever you want for free, but how are these people going to make a living giving it to you? How am I making a living giving it to you? I would love to be able to make a living doing this, but it's impossible. And it's become more and more difficult because people are expecting to pay less and less and to get more and more and to have it whenever they want it and to basically not be charged. And so that's really, really a difficult conundrum that the entire music industry, but the classical music industry especially, is trying to deal with and to answer. And it's particularly difficult in the classical music industry because classical music is important. They keep telling us. Classical music is underfunded. They keep telling us. I think this is all bull. I think classical music is no more important than any other kind of entertainment. And I think there's way too much money out there. There are too many performers. There are too many orchestras. There's too much of everything. And the fact of the matter is that if there were less, it would be more valuable and we would care about it more. But I'm not going to change anything. The situation is what it is. And so I am so looking forward to having this opportunity to ask you to join me in canvassing this unbelievable world of classical music, of recordings, of music down through the centuries. And I've got a fairly sizable chunk of it sitting right here. So I don't think there's any shortage of material. I look forward to talking to you about it now and in the many, many months to come. Thank you for joining me. I want to thank all of you who subscribed, all of you who listen, all of you who argue, all of you who occasionally curse me out. We're having a great time. And especially now with the pandemic going on and everything in crisis, it seems, it's so important that I think that we come together as a community and just have a good time. I'm having a wonderful time doing this. I hope you have a good time, watching it. And if it annoys you, face it. You're having a good time doing that too. So we're all going to keep on listening, and I'm going to continue reporting what I hear and looking forward to hearing what you hear. Thank you so much. Take care.